Good day, chess world. Most adult improvers, most chess players, when they're starting out in the chess game, they're seeking to grow their chess. Even people we call a club level player make the mistake of, well, simply sticking their king away in the corner for the whole game. They think the king is a liability. They think, no, 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 I got to keep my king tucked away, safe and sound. Otherwise, I'm going to get caught in a tactic or checkmated. Well, Capablanca is going to show us in this game that is not true. When queens come off the board, you have to have a plan of how to get your king into the action. You need to get your king active. You need to get your king as a powerful participant. And that's what we're going to see in this game, game 26 from the Chernev in-game book series on Capablanca's wonderful games. And this is actually from a match against Kostics in Capablanca. Sorry, from Capablanca in Havana. And it's going to demonstrate to you the importance of number one, patience, but number two, getting your king in as an active contributor and how we make it work. So let's get into this game and have a look see. What are the learning points that I want you to pick up on this continuing endgame series? So let's keep it simple. Number one, the king as a fighting piece. That's the story of this game. As we're going to see, this battle with Kostić managed to hold the line and technically had this kind of endgame that the engine would say 0-0 for both sides. But actually, it was all advantage to white. Why? Because white is the one who could keep pressing. White is could keep making the decisions. And it all came down to the king. So what I want you to point out and get an understanding in these is you need to focus on number one, the path of your king. Generally, I want to give you the advice. Try to centralize your king. But it's if you can, you've got to form a plan. How's my king going to get in the game? What is my king going to be able to do? And that's what we're talking in this one. The second part is to see the journey of the king, as we'll see all the way from the back rank up eventually, all the way onto the other side of the board for the opponent. And once Capablanca has his opponent in real difficulty, he doesn't rush, he doesn't try and force issues, he shows patience. And that's very important. And the final factor that we'll see in this game was the king was the deciding factor, that activity of the king, and how much it really meant in our decision making. So let's jump into our chess position for this wonderful one. So here we have it, endgame 26. And we have this moment where Capablanca's on the white side, Kostic on black. And fundamentally, let's talk about who do we think is better or worse, what we think is going on here. In simple terms, technically it's equal, but white is the one that presses. Why can I say that? Well, it's pretty simple. The rook places pressure here, the bishop cuts off the enemy king, this bishop stops the other pieces from joining in. So right now, if we take a close look, the white pieces are, if we could say, suppressing the black pieces, which gives the white pieces the little bit of upper hand. The problem is there isn't a direct way to improve the position. So Capablanca sits out on this plan where we need to think about, and in this motion, how do we make threats? How do we put pressure? And he focuses on these light squares, which are a little bit weak. So we would say it's equal, but now we're going to see from this game how Capablanca uses his patience to grow the position, little bit by little bit, and fundamentally put pressure onto his opponent. So we get now this move where knight goes into h4. Nothing wrong with this move. The idea is very simple. He wants to skip in with his knight. But now in this moment, his opponent plays knight d4, and suddenly it's rather clear that the black knight is better than the white knight. Kappa still keeps going with his plan. He plays knight f5. Knight cape captures, pawn takes. Now he's doubled his pawns, doubled the bishop pawns. He's isolated this pawn. What has he gained out of it? Space. Space matters in the endgame. This pawn is now restricting black's ability to try and bring his king in, try to get his pieces to advance. So this is the part of the moment where he can develop and generate pressure. Also bear in mind, a weakness only counts as a weakness if you can attack it. And that is right now the problem, as we'll see for black. Black cannot continue to put sustained pressure onto any of these pawns at this stage. Look, black is still doing a great job. The active rook causing trouble over here, tying down Capablanca's rook. So this makes sense. Bishop to d7. Now he plays his bishop back to e4. And, okay, nothing wrong with this. Rook goes to a6. Now, the idea from the opponent is he would like to get his bishop here and trade off his bishop that's rather limited. Capablanca says, no, I'm preventing that. So the bishop goes to c6, bishop takes, rook takes. There is nothing at all wrong here about the plan from Kostics. Here he's made a lot of logical sense. So how are we going to grow our position? Because at this stage, it almost looks like Capablanca hasn't fundamentally improved things. As a matter of fact, it almost looks like he's made things weaker. And things are not out of control, but here's where we need to form this plan. I want you to think, you are playing here with the white pieces, and how are you going to grow this position? What are you going to do to make this position better? Well, the clue's in the title. It's all about the king. So those of you who are taking notes, those of you who are signed up on the mailing list, please join in the description below where I send out these notes for review. Well, it's all about the king. And of course, we're going to get that king into the action, and he plays king g2. As we'll see, this king is going to start on a rather long journey, but it will be the difference maker in this game because black's king cannot keep up. So now we get this move rook a6, king to f3, rook to a2. He wants to pressure the pawns, bishop g3. And then there is this problem. He plays his king now to e8, and Capablanca says, well, maybe I'm not happy where the bishop is. This patience from Capablanca also is one of the things that's so very difficult for any chess player to do, where Capablanca will look at a chess position anew almost every single move. Last move, he just put his bishop onto g3 and he says, you know what, maybe that wasn't the best idea. And he decides, I'm going to play bishop f4 because his purpose now is to get this bishop to pressure this pawn. So very, very smart. And this is an important little story. Of course, there's the famous quote that an error only becomes a mistake when you refuse to correct it. And in this point, this is what Capablanca is so very good to do. Very difficult for any of us ordinary humans to do, where we move the bishop here to g3, and while we're making our considerations, next move we move it to f4, coming back, almost admitting, oh, I wasted a move there. But Capablanca understands this position is more about patience. He can't really push yet. The reason for that is that we have one weakness on c5. Yes, we can put pressure on that one weakness, but then what? Where's the other weakness? We need a second point we can strike against, and that is where g7 comes in. Now, solving that problem is not so easy. Now, first and foremost, if black decides they want to play rook d6, we can already see how Capablanca has set things up. This is a horribly poor move. Why? Because rook takes, bishop takes. In will fly the white king. And guess what? That one weakness is enough to win this game, because those of you on the notes can remember some of the earlier lessons. Go back and watch some of the earlier videos on bishop endings. And in bishop endings, Capablanca gave us a wonderful rule for bishop endings. Put your pawns on the opposite color of your bishop. White has that in abundance. Black doesn't. All these pawns are stuck on the same color as the bishops, and this is why he's in a terrible mess. Why? Because the white king now is going to get into d5 and force victory, that this pawn will fall and the next one will fall behind it as well. Whereas the poor black bishop here has no prospect of attacking anything. So great demonstration. Two factors. Capablanca already sees all of his pawns are on the right color, so he's happy to trade rooks. And the second feature is the activity of his king. So the opponent plays rook a1. The opponent here, Kostics, is no fool. You don't get to play a match with Capablanca if you're a weak chess player. So the point that he recognizes is very simple. He sees that he has to keep rooks on. Also, in fairness, his rook is very active. It's not limited by anything. So the king now goes to g4. Where is this king going? This king's on a journey, and Kostics doesn't quite understand where, because now the rook goes back to a7. I wouldn't say this is optimal. I would believe that it's better to go and maybe pause pressure over here, something along that line. Even rook b1. So rook a7 is what we call suboptimal, but it's not a mistake completely, because the rook isn't really doing anything there. His whole idea, as we'll see, is after king h5, he sees the danger that if this king gets in, he has a problem. So he decides to play king f7, and this is why he wanted the rook there, because he doesn't want to see this pin arriving on the square. But now, well, key moment. This is where Capablanca starts to apply that pressure and sees that, look, if he could get his king in, he's on the brink of victory, because then he's targeting these two weaknesses. And that gives us a clue to what we should do here. If you're playing white, what's your idea? What are you playing with? I hope you remember from the notes and from the previous videos. Plan number 1 in the endgame: attack the opponent's weak pawns. The purpose is to tie them down. Rook up here to d5. Such a very nice move in this case. So very good. Now, it might almost look like we're accomplishing nothing, but actually we put a great deal of pressure on black. And again, Kostics shows he knows what he's doing. Why do I say that? Because, well, let's think. If you were thinking of black's best move, what would you think black is going to do here? How's black going to play? Well, first and foremost, we talk of options. Defending the pawn, rook c7, rook a5 are these two options. But those of you that are understanding how to apply these principles, the rook should look for activity, and plan number 1 is attack the opponent's weak pawns. So yes, he should be playing rook a3. That's what he played in the game. Let's just unpack, why is a move like rook a5 so very poor in this case? Well, it's rather simple. The rook gets in on the 7th. Now, they're tied down. They're restricted. The threat is very simple. If the rook moves away, bishop takes c5 wins material. So the king has to move. And now suddenly, this pawn is in a mess. The king is threatening to join in. This is a very uncomfortable position. And as we'll see, if they decide to return their king to f7, the plan is very simple from white. That tool earlier, Zugzwang, patience. Simply give the move to your opponent. This is like the last game that we saw, where Capablanca calmly, clearly hands the move to the opponent and says, well, what are you going to do? And every single move weakens their position. If they move the rook away, the bishop would capture. And of course, their only move is to move the king. And now if they move king here, in will invade the king to g6. And suddenly we see a nightmare position for the opponent. This variation gives us a clue. This is what Capablanca wants to aim for in this case. So his opponent is very smart. His opponent plays actively. His opponent sets things up. His opponent plays rook a3, carrying his own threats. Well, Capablanca says, well, let me invade. First and foremost, rook takes b3 would be terrible because a bishop takes c5. Great. Now we get king to e8. What should Capablanca do? Is it the idea of getting behind here? Well, again, I'll give you the tip that we've had earlier in the series, which is very simple. Please remember this one. Try not to trade your pawns for your opponent's weak pawns. We want to win them if we can. At some point, as we'll see in this game, maybe we have no choice. But Capablanca nonetheless decides, I'm going to go back to rook d3. This patience. His opponent cannot do anything to grow the position. So his opponent plays king f7. And Capablanca now realizes, well, if my opponent moves the rook away, rook d5 will benefit me. And at the same time, if they move the king away, I can invade with my king. So, very nice moment. He plays this move h4, handing his opponent a move, showing that patience, saying to his opponent, well, what can you do to improve your position? And I just want you to see this theme. It's all built around the fact that g7 is going to come under threat if the king gets in here. As we'll see, that becomes a very important story later on. Whereas black's pieces don't generate the same threats. Notice black's king is not anywhere near to creating a threat. White's king is an offensive weapon, getting in, looking to create tactical threats. This bishop is putting pressure here, forcing the opposing bishop to defend. The rook is the only difference maker for black, the only one that is the, if you will, fly in the ointment, the problem of Capablanca's creation. So the opponent plays rook a7, rook to d5, and now we get a very striking moment where, well, his opponent cracks under pressure. The problem that we look at is that rook a3 in this position outright loses. As we'll see, this transposes into the game, because bishop takes c5, bishop takes, rook takes, and now if he goes rook b3, check. This is the massive difference maker. The black king is going to be forced onto the back rank, and it's going to become a target for the white rook and the white king. They're immediately setting up little mating threats. So this is why he's in a very difficult position, and now he tries to stay active. He plays rook a5, which, as we'll see, is a real problem. So the rook invades on d7. The king drops back to e8. Capablanca loses some time at this stage. I think he should just simply play rook c7 while he has the chance and the prospect, but he decides to go rook d3, and we get a bit of a repetition. Rook d5. Now the rook goes to a3. Remember what I said to you, the position will transpose. Capablanca now recognizes his chance. Bishop takes c5, bishop takes, rook takes b3, rook c7 check, king f8. Now we're going to see what I meant when I said that the black king becomes a target. King g6. What a wonderful culmination of planning from Capablanca. This king started on g1. He's gone on this wonderful journey up to g6. Look at that. That's really very impressive. And I want you to see that that's all involved with the planning, the strategy, but also hopefully the tools and understanding that you'll get in this game. So, okay, the king comes to g6. So what? Rook to f3. There's no checkmate to worry about in this case. What do we think we're doing with white? This is such an instructive moment. I want you to, again, take this kind of position, go play this against the bot. This is not some position that belongs in a theoretical textbook of this is the precise way that you must play. This is a position that you must practice, spar. If you have some friends that you can compete against, play some training games, this is the kind of position you do it in. I'm sure they wouldn't want to play black, but practicing how to convert this substantial advantage is going to pay massive dividends for your improvement. Reason for that is you're going to start to develop a feeling for where do you want to put the pieces and what you want to accomplish. And first and foremost, our goal here is, of course, we want to destroy all these pawns. But we need to be rather careful about how we approach this, because we would like to do it in a manner where the enemy king is the biggest liability it can be. What I mean by that is very simple. Rook f7 check. Now, of course, the king cannot go to g8 because we take with check. So we drive the king away. Now he takes on g7. Now there's no pressure of attacking the rook in any way, shape, or form. So the opponent plays rook f4. All very reasonable. Now here's a question for you. Which pawn do you keep for white? You see, you have your c pawn and you have your h pawn, both attacked here. Your f2 pawn, it's gone. It's a double pawn. We're not concerned by that one. So which one are you going to keep? And that's what I said to you about the strategy, developing a feeling of how you want to play. If this was a king and pawn endgame, well, we would be lost because their outside pawn is unstoppable. But generally, you'd want to keep your passed pawn that's far away in these cases, not in the rook ending. Here in the rook ending, we want to focus on the pawns we can protect and use as weapons. So, of course, we're going to keep our h-pawn. Why? Because now they take on h5, we take on h6. Not the only way to approach this one here, but the entire idea in this position is very clever, is, of course, we want to come back and grab this pawn, and at the same time, we're ready to get out the way and the pawn can run. But hold on, there's a very interesting moment here. Remember I said to you about the king and pawn ending. Why can the opponent not play rook g4 check? What is going on in this position here? How do you think we should approach this now? Rook g4 check, he's going to take off this pawn and he's going to promote this one. This looks lost. Put it in the chat below. Put it in this description here. What is white's path to success? The cool part is there's two of them. So let's see which one you find as your chosen path in this case. There are two paths for white to win this, and obviously three candidate moves. So a wonderful moment here where rook takes c4, king takes h6, king goes to f8, and of course, Tarash's rule applied wonderfully well. Rooks belong behind passed pawns. And I want you to remember this one in rook endings. We want to turn the enemy king into a target. This is part of the reason why rooks absolutely love getting to the seventh rank. It's their happy place. It cuts off the enemy king, causes all the trouble of those pawns. So now we get this moment. Rook g4. Capablanca plays this little finesse, f3. It's not really necessary, but the basic point is he basically tells the rook, look, you've got to make a decision. Are you going to keep my king cut off, or are you going to defend your pawn? If he moves across, well, what are we going to do? We're going to move our king. We're preparing to advance, but more importantly, we're preparing to take at the right time with the intention of setting up a mate net. So all of this is too good. Pass pawn is running along, and at the same time, the king cannot even think about coming across because we have mate. So that's why he decides, okay, I'm going to play rook g5. Rook takes here on f4. He plays king to f7. The point being that if he played rook takes on f5, we'll simply play f4, and then we're going to prepare this pawn plus the other problems in this position the opponent will have. So there's a whole bunch of different issues which he's really struggling with here. So he decides king f7, trying to box in the white king. How do we solve this? What are we doing to get our king into the action and active in this case? Looks like a tough one. The nice part is we've actually got a couple of solutions to this one. So Capablanca's choice, very simple, very clear. He decides to play rook g4, and it's very clear here they can't capture. We are going to be up 2 pawns on that side of the board. So a nice little clever idea from Capablanca. The opponent captures with their rook and pawn to f4. Now, when we look at this position, we might think, but we're only up 1 pawn. There's only 2 pawns left. But actually, what's so very important is we are so close to a very simple win. Move king out way, push pawn, go get queen. That's it. That's what we want to do. It's as easy as can be. Now, of course, black is working desperately hard to try and prevent that. But unfortunately for them, it's really not an easy task. So he swings his rook across. Let's think about how we're going to accomplish that. We want our king out of the way to push the pawn. So that's part of that strategy of achieving the goal that we want here. And this one, of course, counts as a theoretical ending. Funny enough, there is only one way to win this, but it's pretty clear and easy for us. We're going to play rook check. Now the point is, if their king comes up the board, we have the plan, king g6. If that pawn is going to go on its path, that is our clear, simple goal. So the opponent plays king f8, trying desperately to hold things together. Well, Capablanca smartly swings his rook across. Why he does it in this order is that he wants first to keep the rook as far away from the enemy king as possible. We just want to avoid little tricks where there's a check here and suddenly they can grab our rook with some sort of tactic. We don't want our king tied down. Also, secondly, he's now setting up this idea of getting the king out the way and advancing. So the opponent now decides to play in a difficult position, pawn to f5. Let's unpack if the opponent briefly played rook f5, attacking our pawn. The plan is simple, king g6, rook takes. We push h6. Now they will deliver check, trying to cause trouble. That is a mate threat. This is a real substantial problem for them. And here, a lovely question for all of you. If the king moved to g8, trying to stop the pawn, what is white's only win? I'm going to keep it in suspense. Please put it in the chat below. Let's see who can find that. White's only win in this position. Look carefully. Think, how do you force this? Now, obviously, if they don't move across, if they try and harass us with another check, we simply go king g5. We've built a very nice win. They can move their rook down, and then we simply go with a great trick I want you to remember. Deliver check, gain control of the promotion square, and then when the king moves up here to their choice, we push h7, and we will promote and win. So that's our winning plan. That's what we're looking to do. So this is why he plays a strange-looking move like f5. He's trying to set it up to deliver a check or cause some kind of trouble. He's trying to take away the ability of the king to operate on the 6th rank. That doesn't stop us. King g6, check. Thanks very much. We'll take that pawn. Check. Now he simply goes to g4 because otherwise the opponent was just going to keep repeating. And now after rook a6, king g5, rook c6 pushes these pawns, king g8 pushes to f6. Why? Because we're preparing to build a little shelter, set up a checkmate. So the opponent has to harass us. He comes to the other side of the pawns. And this is a great technique, at least we're learning from black. When he wants to try and hold this type of position, get behind the pawns so he can get the maximum checks. The problem is here his king is so passive, there's just no draw. So Capablanca chooses this when rook g7 check, king goes to f8, and he just keeps on rolling with the h-pawn. So here the opponent resigns. Why? What is our winning plan? Well, it's pretty simple. We're going to go h7 and we're going to go promote and get a queen. So the opponent would deliver check and then we would simply move away. There's other ways to win this, but a nice fun one is after check. Our king is just going to walk down the board towards the rook when he checks us. And there is our winning plan, h7. If need be, check, go get a queen, job done. So overall, a wonderful win for Capablanca. And there's a couple of features that I really want you to pick up, but the common theme, the big lesson, is look at White's king. Look how spectacularly active that White king is. When we started this game, Black's king was sitting over here, back out of the game, not doing very much. White's king, what an active monster. He worked for this win. This White king was joining his forces in battle, making sure that his instructions and commands were right there. Very, very important to see the activity of this king. Now, earlier we can go back and we can talk of that story that potentially Kostics almost threw it away, but it was very difficult in-game to hold, where Capablanca just kept prodding, kept patient, kept causing trouble for the opponent. Very, very instructive. So in terms of closing, let's look at those learning moments for us, just to understand in this case. So this one here, super instructive. 4 key lessons. Number 1, the king. The moment queens come off the board, you've got to have a plan to prepare. Where does my king get in the action? How do I get my king in the action? That's so huge. Absolutely crucial. Finding that path. Just remember, when queens are on the board, king safety is everything. The moment queens come off, you've got to be thinking, when do I get my king in? How do I get my king in? Prepare before you march your king in. The next theme that I want you to remember is if you're not sure, centralize your king. In this case, Capablanca's king, just remember that moment where we looked at if potentially the rooks came off, how quickly his king ran into the center and would win. You want your king ready to get into the center so it can dictate where it goes. The next one is the patience from Capablanca. Try one idea, keep your opponent in trouble. If he defends that one, let's try another one. And that's what Capablanca showed in this game. And finally, that theme of Zugzwang. When the opponent thought they just managed to hold the position, Capablanca pushed his h-pawn and said, no, have the move. And suddenly the opponent's position fell apart. So very instructive using that detail. And I want to give you 2 bits of thinking work for yourself, 2 takeaways. Look, fundamentally, I want you to think back at some of your recent games that you've played, and especially the end games. When did you bring your king in? Most adult improvers, they start, in many cases, actually 5, 6 moves too late to bring in their king. Look at Capablanca's one. The first chance he got, he brought that king in. And one of his big ideas was actually suppressing the enemy king by getting the double pawns and then getting his king in. So go back and look at some of your recent endgames and ask yourself, hey, could I have played better getting my king in earlier, finding a role, a job for my king? Was that necessary? And then finally, I want you to remember this and repeat this. The king is a fighting piece in the endgame. It's very important. Opening a middle game, you've got to keep your king well sheltered. But the end game, that's where your king's got to be able to join in and fight, create threats. Most amateurs don't believe it. They think the king just needs to stay tucked away so it doesn't get caught in a tactic. Nope. The end game, you have to maximize all your pieces. So we're going to see the return game where Capablanca is on the black side. And that game, again, Kostics defends incredibly well when we get into the latter parts of the game. But fundamentally, it's going to be a great theme of 2 rooks and a bishop against 2 rooks and a knight. And we're going to see how Kostics actually struggles to work with his knight. And Capablanca flips it round a little bit. Again, turns the enemy king into a target. So post below what things in the chats you found most instructive. and let's jump into our next game.